Sometimes a man spends his whole life wondering about the father who walked away. Sometimes he builds walls around that hurt so high, he forgets there's still a boy inside wanting answers. Cole Burnham made millions breeding horses, but all the money in the world couldn't fill the hole his daddy left behind. When he rolls into the ghost town of Gold Dust with his old dog Duke, folks think he's lost his mind buying that broken saloon for $100. But Cole knows his father disappeared here in 1968. Duke starts digging under the floorboards and finds a rusted tin box. Inside is a letter addressed to Cole in his father's handwriting. What secrets had been buried beneath that saloon floor for 50 years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dust kicked up by Cole Burnham's pickup truck hung in the air long after he'd parked in front of what used to be the Gold Dust Saloon. Through the cracked windshield, he studied the weathered building that had haunted his dreams for 37 years. Paint peeled from its wooden facade like old skin, and the bat-wing doors hung askew on rusted hinges. Above the entrance, a faded sign still bore the outline of letters that once proudly announced the establishment's name. Duke, a grizzled German shepherd with more gray than brown in his muzzle, pressed his nose against the passenger window and whined softly. The dog had been Cole's constant companion for 8 years now, ever since that day at the animal shelter when those amber eyes had looked right through him and seen something worth saving. "I know, boy," Cole said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "Doesn't look like much, does it?" But Cole wasn't seeing the broken-down saloon before him. In his mind's eye, he saw the place as it might have been in 1968, alive with conversation, the clink of glasses, and the shuffle of cards. He saw his father, Thomas Burnham, walking through those doors for the last time. Cole stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel and scattered debris. At 62, he moved with the careful precision of a man who'd learned to measure his steps, though his shoulders still carried the broad strength that came from a lifetime of working with horses. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who'd spent more time squinting into sunsets than sitting in boardrooms. Despite the fortune he'd accumulated, the Burnham Ranch had made him wealthy beyond his boyhood dreams. Thoroughbred bloodlines worth millions grazed in his pastures, and his name was spoken with respect at tracks from Kentucky to California. But all the success in the world couldn't answer the question that had gnawed at him since he was 7 years old. Why had his father walked away? Duke bounded out of the truck and immediately began sniffing around the saloon's foundation, his tail wagging with the excitement of new territory. Cole watched his companion explore, remembering how his mother used to tell him that animals could sense things people couldn't. Maybe that was why he'd brought Duke along on this journey into his past. The town of Gold Dust had died slowly, like a patient refusing to surrender to an inevitable illness. What had once been a thriving mining community was now little more than a collection of empty buildings and overgrown lots. The main street, which probably bustled with activity during the town's heyday, was now cracked asphalt sprouting weeds through every fissure. Cole had done his research before making the drive from his ranch in Wyoming. Gold Dust's population had peaked at nearly 3,000 souls in the 1940s when the Copper Crown mine was still producing. By 1968, when his father disappeared, fewer than 500 people remained. Now, according to the last census, exactly 14 residents called Gold Dust home. The saloon had been abandoned for over 20 years when Cole contacted the town clerk about purchasing it. The conversation had been brief and somewhat bewildering to the elderly woman on the other end of the line. "You want to buy the old saloon?" she'd asked, her voice crackling through the poor phone connection. "Mister, that building's been nothing but trouble for longer than I care to remember. What do you want with it?" Cole had given her a simplified version of the truth, that his father had spent time in Gold Dust and he wanted to purchase the building for sentimental reasons. He didn't mention the sleepless nights spent wondering if Thomas Burnham had chosen to abandon his family, or if something darker had kept him from coming home. The purchase price of $100 seemed almost insulting, but the clerk assured him it was fair market value for a building that needed more work than it was worth. Cole had wired the money that same afternoon. Now, standing before the saloon with Duke at his side, Cole pulled the brass key from his pocket and approached the front door. The metal was warm from the afternoon sun, and it took some coaxing to turn in the old lock. The hinges protested with a groan that seemed to echo the building's weariness. Inside, shafts of sunlight pierced the gloom through broken windows and gaps in the roof. Dust motes danced in the golden beams, and the air carried the musty scent of decades of neglect, mixed with something else. Something that reminded Cole of his grandfather's tobacco pouch. The interior was larger than it appeared from outside. A long bar dominated one wall, its mirror cracked but still reflecting distorted images of the empty room. Tables and chairs were scattered about, some overturned, others stacked in corners where someone had made a half-hearted attempt at organization years ago. Behind the bar, shelves that once held bottles of whiskey and beer now collected dust and mouse droppings. Cole walked slowly through the space, his footsteps echoing in the silence. This was where his father had spent his final known days. According to the few records Cole had been able to find, Thomas Burnham had rented a room above the saloon and worked odd jobs around town. The official story was that he'd simply moved on one day, as drifters were known to do. But something about that explanation had never sat right with Cole's mother, and her doubts had planted seeds of suspicion in her young son's mind. Duke had wandered behind the bar and was sniffing intently at a section of the wooden floor. His behavior was different from his usual curious exploration, more focused, more purposeful. The dog began pawing at a particular floorboard, his nails scraping against the wood. "What is it, boy?" Cole asked, joining his companion behind the bar. The floorboard Duke had identified was slightly different from the others, a little looser, with gaps around the edges that suggested it had been removed and replaced. Cole knelt beside the dog and ran his fingers along the board's edges. Sure enough, it lifted easily, revealing a small cavity beneath. Cole's heart hammered as he reached into the space and felt something solid. His fingers closed around a metal object, a tin box about the size of a cigar case, its surface rough with rust but still intact. Duke whined softly as Cole lifted the box into the light, as if the dog understood the significance of the discovery. The lid was stuck, but gentle persistence eventually coaxed it open. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth that had protected them from moisture and time, were 3 items that would change everything Cole thought he knew about his father's disappearance. The first was a faded photograph, a family portrait that took Cole's breath away. There was his mother, young and beautiful, holding a toddler that was unmistakably Cole himself. Beside them stood a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile that revealed a distinctive gold tooth. Cole had seen that tooth in his earliest memories, though he'd sometimes wondered if he'd imagined it. The second item was a wedding ring, simple gold, worn smooth by years of wear. Engraved inside the band were the initials TB and MB and the date June 15th, 1959, Thomas and Margaret Burnham's wedding date. Cole's father hadn't abandoned this ring along with his family. He'd hidden it here, in this place, for reasons Cole couldn't yet fathom. The third item made Cole's hands tremble as he unfolded it. A letter, written in his father's careful script, addressed to "My son, Cole." The ink had faded but remained legible, and the first few lines were enough to shatter every assumption Cole had carried for 37 years. "If you're reading this, son, then something has happened to me, and you've come looking for answers. I need you to know that I never wanted to leave you and your mother. I came to Gold Dust chasing a lead on something that could have made us rich, but I found something else instead. Something dangerous. I'm writing this because I'm afraid they know I'm on to them, and if something happens to me, Someone needs to know the truth. The letter was longer, but Cole's eyes were too blurred with tears to read further. His father hadn't abandoned them. Thomas Burnham had been trying to provide for his family when something, or someone, had stopped him from coming home. Duke pressed against Cole's leg, offering the comfort that only a loyal dog could provide. The late afternoon sun was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the saloon floor, but Cole barely noticed. He was lost in a revelation that changed everything he thought he knew about his father and himself. For 37 years, he'd carried the weight of abandonment, the belief that he somehow hadn't been worth staying for. Now, holding his father's words in his trembling hands, Cole understood that Thomas Burnham had been fighting for his family right up until the end. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutters and sending a few tumbleweeds dancing down the empty street. But inside the saloon, Cole sat in the growing darkness with his father's letter, his father's ring, and his father's photograph, finally beginning to understand that his quest for answers was just beginning. Duke settled beside him with a contented sigh, as if the old dog knew they'd found what they came looking for. Not closure, but a doorway to the truth that had been buried beneath these floorboards for over 50 years. Cole struck a match and lit the old kerosene lamp he'd found behind the bar, casting dancing shadows across the saloon walls. The flame provided just enough light to read the rest of his father's letter, though his hands still trembled as he unfolded the fragile paper completely. I came here following stories about gold that was never properly claimed from the old Copper Crown mine, the letter continued. Figured if I could find some documentation, maybe stake a legal claim, it could change everything for us. But there's more going on here than anyone knows. The mine didn't play out like they claimed. Someone's been working it in secret, taking out ore and keeping it quiet. I've seen trucks coming and going at night, and I think I know who's behind it. Cole paused, his father's words painting a picture very different from the simple abandonment story he'd grown up believing. Duke shifted closer, sensing his master's emotional turmoil. The men running this operation don't take kindly to outsiders asking questions. I've been careful, but I think they're getting suspicious. Yesterday, one of them cornered me behind Murphy's General Store. Big fellow with a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. Told me it might be healthier if I moved on. I smiled and agreed, but I could see it in his eyes. They're not going to let me just walk away. The letter described the box Cole now held, explaining that Thomas had hidden it as insurance, along with evidence of the illegal mining operation, but it was the final paragraph that broke Cole's heart completely. If something happens to me, I need you to know that every day away from you and your mama has been agony. I kiss the picture of you both every night and dream of coming home with enough money to give you the life you deserve. I love you more than all the gold in these mountains, son. If you find this letter, don't try to be a hero. Take the evidence to the law and let them handle it. Your old dad might not be much, but he's smart enough to know when he's outgunned. The letter was signed simply, "Love always, Dad," followed by a date, September 15th, 1968. 3 days before Thomas Burnham had disappeared forever. Cole wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and examined the tin box more carefully. In the bottom, wrapped in a separate piece of cloth, was something that confirmed beyond any doubt that this letter was genuine. A gold tooth. Not a real tooth, but a dental crown that had once gleamed in his father's smile. Cole remembered it vividly now, how the light would catch it when his father laughed, which had been often in those early years before life wore them all down. The memory hit him with unexpected force. He was 5 years old, sitting on his father's shoulders at the county fair. Thomas was laughing at something a friend had said, and the gold tooth caught the light from the carnival rides. Cole had reached down and touched it, fascinated, and his father had pretended to bite his tiny finger, making monster noises that sent Cole into peals of delighted laughter. "You remember that too, don't you, Dad?" Cole whispered to the empty saloon. But even as the childhood memory warmed him, a darker realization was taking hold. His father hadn't lost that tooth naturally. Someone had taken it from him, probably after they'd killed him. The men who'd been running the illegal mining operation had made sure Thomas Burnham disappeared permanently, but they'd kept a trophy. Cole's grief began transforming into something harder, more dangerous. For 37 years, he'd blamed his father for abandoning them. He'd carried that anger through failed relationships, through the lonely nights when success felt meaningless, through every Father's Day and birthday when he'd wondered if Thomas Burnham even remembered having a son. Now he knew the truth. His father had died trying to provide for his family, murdered by men who saw him as a threat to their operation. The abandonment that had shaped Cole's entire life had been a lie built on top of a grave. Duke suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward toward the front of the saloon. The dog's body tensed, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Cole quickly extinguished the lamp, plunging them into darkness, and listened carefully. Footsteps. Someone was walking around the outside of the building, trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. The steps paused near the front door, and Cole could see a shadow moving past one of the broken windows. Cole's heart pounded as he carefully placed his father's belongings back in the tin box and tucked it inside his jacket. Duke remained motionless beside him, a coiled spring ready to act on his master's command. The footsteps continued around the building's perimeter as if someone was conducting a thorough inspection. After several tense minutes, the sounds faded into the distance. Cole waited another 10 minutes before relighting the lamp, his mind racing. Someone was watching him, just as they'd watched his father all those years ago. The illegal mining operation Thomas had discovered might still be running, which meant the men who'd killed him might still be alive. Cole felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool evening air seeping through the saloon's broken windows. He'd come to Gold Dust looking for answers about his father's abandonment, and instead found evidence of murder and ongoing criminal activity. The smart thing would be to take his father's letter and evidence to the authorities, just as Thomas had advised in his final message. But as Cole looked around the abandoned saloon where his father had spent his last days, alone and afraid but still thinking of his family, he knew he couldn't simply walk away. Not yet. His father had been brave enough to investigate dangerous men in hopes of providing for his wife and child. The least Cole could do was honor that courage by learning the full truth. Duke nuzzled against his leg, and Cole scratched behind the dog's ears. "Looks like we're staying a while longer, boy," he murmured. "Dad was onto something big, and I think those footsteps outside mean his killers are still around." The implications settled over him like a heavy blanket. If the mining operation was still active, if the same men or their associates were still in Gold Dust, then Cole had walked directly into the middle of something dangerous. But he'd also found something they probably didn't know existed: his father's evidence, hidden away for over 50 years. Cole carefully examined the rest of the tin box contents by lamplight. Besides the letter, photograph, ring, and gold tooth, there was a small leather pouch containing what looked like ore samples and a folded paper with crude maps and notes in his father's handwriting. The notes mentioned specific locations in and around the mine, along with dates and times that suggested Thomas had been conducting surveillance of the illegal operation. As he studied his father's careful documentation, Cole began to understand the scope of what Thomas had discovered. This wasn't just a small-time theft of leftover ore. The notes suggested a systematic, long-term operation involving multiple people and significant amounts of gold. No wonder they'd been willing to kill to protect their secret. The weight of discovery settled on Cole's shoulders. He'd come to Gold Dust hoping to understand why his father had left. Instead, he'd learned that Thomas Burnham had never left at all. He died here, alone and far from the family he loved, trying to build a better future for them. But Cole also realized something else. His father's investigation had been cut short by murder, but the evidence had survived. After 50 years, Thomas Burnham's son had found the proof that could finally bring his killers to justice. The question now was whether Cole had the courage to finish what his father had started. Outside, an owl called in the distance, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote answered. Duke settled down beside Cole with a watchful alertness, understanding that their vigil was far from over. The night was just beginning, and with it, Cole's real education in the dangerous legacy his father had left behind. Cole woke before dawn to Duke's gentle nudging. The old dog had positioned himself by the saloon's front window, watching the street with the patient intensity of a sentry. Through the cracked glass, Cole could see the first pale hints of sunrise touching the mountains that surrounded Gold Dust. He'd spent the night in his sleeping bag on the saloon floor, his father's tin box close at hand. Sleep had come fitfully, interrupted by the sounds of an old building settling and the weight of revelation pressing on his chest. Every creak and whisper of wind through broken boards made him wonder if someone was returning to investigate his presence. As he rolled up his sleeping bag, Cole's fingers brushed against something unexpected beneath a loose section of floorboard near where he'd slept. Further investigation revealed a small gap that his father had apparently used as another hiding place. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather, was a journal bound in cracked brown leather. Cole opened it carefully, recognizing his father's handwriting on the first page. Private Investigation, Gold Dust Mining Operation, September 1968. The journal was a revelation. Thomas Burnham hadn't just stumbled onto the illegal mining operation. He'd conducted a methodical investigation with the thoroughness of a trained detective. Each entry was dated and detailed, building a comprehensive picture of a criminal enterprise that had been operating since at least the early 1960s. September 3rd, 1968. Arrived in Gold Dust. Rented room above Saloon from Mrs. Patterson. Town smaller than expected, but locals friendly enough. Asked casual questions about the old mine. Most folks say it played out years ago, but old Pete Morrison got a strange look in his eyes and changed the subject quick. September 5th, 1968. Spent day exploring area around Copper Crown Mine, official entrance sealed with concrete and warning signs, but found fresh tire tracks leading to area behind the mountain. Someone's been driving heavy vehicles up there recently. September 8th, 1968. Watched the mountain from distance with binoculars. Saw dust cloud. Around 2 a.m., heard machinery running. Definitely active operation. Need to get closer. As Cole read through the entries, he gained a new respect for his father's intelligence and courage. Thomas had systematically mapped the criminal operation, identifying key players, documenting their activities, and building a case that could have brought them all down. September 12th, 1968. Confirmed 3 main players, big fellow with scar who calls himself Briggs, thin nervous type named Carson, and someone they call the Colonel, who seems to be in charge but stays in shadows. They're taking high-grade ore out almost nightly. Must be worth thousands. September 14th, 1968. Got too close last night. Briggs spotted me and gave warning. Says it's healthier for strangers to move along. Told him I'm just passing through, but don't think he believed it. Need to be more careful. The final entry was dated September 15th, 1968. The same date as the letter Cole had found. His father's last words in the journal were ominous. They're watching the saloon now. Saw Carson across the street twice today. If something happens to me, I've hidden evidence where Cole might find it someday. My boy's smart. Smarter than his old man. He'll know what to do. Cole closed the journal, emotion threatening to overwhelm him again. His father had been thinking of him even in those final dangerous days, planning for the possibility that his investigation might cost him his life. Thomas Burnham had faced his killers knowing he might never see his wife and son again, but determined to leave them something valuable: the truth. Duke whined softly and padded toward the back of the saloon, where a narrow staircase led to what had once been guest rooms above. The dog paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking back at Cole as if asking permission to investigate. "All right, boy," Cole said, tucking the journal inside his jacket with the tin box. "Let's see what else Dad left for us to find." The stairs protested under their weight, but held. The upper floor consisted of 4 small rooms that had once housed overnight visitors to Gold Dust. Most were empty except for debris and evidence of small animals taking shelter over the years. But the room at the end of the hall was different. Duke led him directly to it, pawing at the closed door until Cole turned the handle. Inside, despite decades of neglect, he could see that someone had once made this space a temporary home. A simple bed frame stood against one wall, and a small table sat beneath a window that looked out toward the mountains. On the table, covered by dust but still recognizable, were a few personal items: a coffee mug, a small mirror, and a photograph of Cole's mother holding baby Cole. This was where his father had lived during those final weeks. This was where Thomas Burnham had planned his investigation, written his journal entries, and worried about the family he'd left behind in pursuit of a better life for them. Cole picked up the photograph, studying his mother's young face. She died 12 years ago, never knowing what had really happened to her husband. She'd gone to her grave believing Thomas had abandoned them, carrying the same pain that had haunted Cole for decades. If only she could have known the truth, that her husband had died loving her and fighting for their future. A noise from downstairs made both Cole and Duke freeze. Someone was moving around the main floor of the saloon, trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. Duke's hackles rose, and he positioned himself between Cole and the stairs, ready to defend his master. Cole crept to the window and peered out carefully. A pickup truck was parked across the street. Not the same vehicle he'd seen yesterday, but clearly someone else who had business in this dead town. Through the saloon's broken windows below, he could hear muffled voices and the sound of someone moving methodically through the space. "Find anything?" a gruff voice asked. "Nah, just some camping gear and tire tracks," another voice replied. "But someone's definitely been poking around down here. Fresh disturbance behind the bar where the floorboards are loose." Cole's blood ran cold. They knew about his father's hiding place. These might be the same men who'd killed Thomas or their associates, still protecting the secret that had cost his father his life. They were searching for evidence, probably the same evidence Cole now carried. "Boss ain't gonna like this," the first voice continued. "Told us to keep an eye on the place, make sure nobody came sniffing around the old man's story." The old man. They were talking about his father. These men knew exactly what had happened to Thomas Burnham 50 years ago, and they were still working to cover it up. Duke remained perfectly still, his training as Cole's ranch dog serving them well. The old German shepherd understood the need for silence, even as every muscle in his body tensed for potential action. The voices moved toward the back of the saloon, then faded as the intruders apparently left through the rear exit. Cole waited several minutes before moving to the front window, watching as the pickup truck drove slowly down the main street and disappeared around a bend. His father's investigation was becoming his own, and the stakes were clearly just as deadly now as they had been 50 years ago. But Cole had advantages Thomas hadn't possessed: modern resources, financial means, and most importantly, his father's carefully documented evidence of the criminal operation. As he descended the stairs with Duke at his side, Cole made a decision. He wouldn't simply take his father's evidence to the authorities and walk away. These men had stolen 50 years of his life by murdering his father and letting his family believe in abandonment. They owed a debt that went far beyond justice. They owed him the truth about his father's final days and his courage in facing overwhelming odds. The morning sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the empty streets of Gold Dust. But the town wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. Somewhere in these mountains, the criminal operation his father had died investigating was still active, still protected by men willing to kill to keep their secrets buried. After the intruders left, Cole spent the morning studying his father's journal more carefully, cross-referencing the entries with the crude maps Thomas had drawn. One location kept appearing in the notes, a place his father had called the back door, somewhere behind the main mine entrance where the illegal operation was based. Around midday, Cole decided to explore the town and see if any of the remaining residents remembered his father. Duke trotted beside him as they walked down Main Street, past empty storefronts and collapsed porches that spoke of better times long gone. The first occupied building they encountered was Murphy's General Store, which, according to his father's journal, was where the confrontation with the scarred man named Briggs had taken place. A hand-painted sign hung crooked in the window, "Open when we feel like it." Cole pushed through the screen door, setting off a bell that had probably announced visitors for decades. Behind the counter sat a woman who looked to be in her 70s, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked up from a crossword puzzle with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "You're the fellow bought the old saloon," she said before Cole could introduce himself. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. Cole Burnham." He approached the counter, Duke settling beside him with his characteristic patience. "Ethel Murphy," she replied, setting down her pencil. "That's a fine-looking dog you got there." "German Shepherd." "Yes, ma'am. His name's Duke." Cole hesitated, then decided on directness. "Mrs. Murphy, I'm hoping you might remember my father, Thomas Burnham. He stayed in town back in 1968. Something flickered across Ethel's weathered features. Recognition, followed quickly by what looked like sadness. "Tom Burnham," she said softly. "Haven't heard that name spoken aloud in 50 years. You're his boy." "I am. I was wondering if you could tell me anything about his time here. What he was like, what he was doing." Ethel studied him for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Your daddy was a good man, son. Polite, hard-working, always paid his bills on time. Helped me move some heavy boxes when my arthritis was acting up." She paused, glancing toward the front window. But he was asking questions that made some folks nervous. What kind of questions? About the mine, mostly. The history of it, who'd worked it over the years, whether there might still be gold up there. Ethel's voice dropped lower. Tom wasn't the only one interested in that mine, if you catch my meaning. Cole felt his pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" Before Ethel could answer, the screen door opened and a man entered. Tall, lean, with the kind of deep tan that came from a lifetime of outdoor work. He nodded to Ethel, then fixed his attention on Cole with obvious curiosity. "Pete Morrison," he introduced himself, extending a calloused hand. "You must be the fellow I heard bought the saloon." Cole Burnham. As they shook hands, Cole noticed Pete's eyes widen slightly at the name. "Burnham," Pete repeated slowly. "Any relation to Tom Burnham used to stay at the saloon back in the late 60s? "My father." Pete and Ethel exchanged a meaningful look. After a moment, Pete seemed to reach a decision. "Son, you might want to know that your daddy and I had several conversations before he left town. Good man, your father. Real good man. What did you talk about?" Pete glanced around the store as if checking for eavesdroppers, then moved closer to the counter. "Tom was convinced there was still active mining going on up at Copper Crown. Said he'd seen evidence of fresh digging, new equipment. Asked me if I'd noticed anything unusual." "Had you?" "Hell yes, I had. Been seeing lights up there at night for years, hearing machinery running when it was supposed to be sealed up tight. But around here, you learn not to ask too many questions about certain things." Pete's expression grew grim. Tom didn't heed that advice. Ethel nodded slowly. Week before he disappeared, Tom came in here all excited. Said he'd found something important, something that proved what he suspected about the mine. But he wouldn't tell me what it was, just said he needed to be careful about who he talked to. Did he seem frightened? Cole asked. Worried, maybe, but not scared exactly. Your daddy struck me as the kind of man who didn't scare easy. Pete rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Last time I saw him, he was coming out of the bank, had a big envelope under his arm, looked like he was mailing something. Cole's interest sharpened. Mailing something where? Don't know, but Martha Hendricks ran the post office back then. She might remember if you can find her. Lives in the little blue house on Elm Street, assuming she's still alive. As Cole prepared to leave the store, Ethel called after him. Son, be careful poking around up at that mine. Your daddy was a smart man and a careful one, but even careful men can get in over their heads. Pete nodded agreement. Some things are better left buried, if you know what I mean. But Cole was beginning to understand that the truth about his father's death was something that couldn't stay buried, not if he wanted to live with himself. He thanked them both and headed for Elm Street with Duke at his side. The blue house was small and well-maintained despite its age. Martha Hendricks turned out to be a spry woman in her 80s who invited Cole onto her front porch for coffee and conversation. When he explained who he was, her face lit up with genuine warmth. Tommy Burnham's boy. Oh my, you have his eyes. And that determined set to your jaw. That's pure Burnham stubbornness right there. Mrs. Hendricks, Pete Morrison said my father might have mailed something from your post office before he disappeared. I'm trying to piece together his final days. Martha's expression grew thoughtful. Oh yes, I remember that. Big manila envelope, certified mail. He was very particular about the address, made me double-check it twice, said it was insurance in case something happened to him. Cole's heart raced. Do you remember where he sent it? Indeed I do. Had such an unusual request that it stuck with me all these years. He sent it to a law office in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Told me to hold it for exactly 30 days, and if he didn't come back to claim it, to mail it out. Well, 30 days came and went with no sign of Tom, so I sent it along just like he asked. Do you remember the name of the law firm? Martha smiled. Course I do. Henderson, Walsh and Associates. Your daddy made me write it down 3 times to make sure I had it right. Said if anything happened to him, that package would find its way to someone who'd know what to do with it. As Cole walked back toward the saloon with this new information, his mind raced with possibilities. His father had been more careful and thorough than Cole had imagined. Thomas had created multiple safeguards, multiple ways for the truth to survive, even if he didn't. Duke suddenly stopped walking and turned toward the mountains, his ears pricked forward and his body alert. Following the dog's gaze, Cole spotted something that made his blood run cold. High on the mountainside, sunlight glinted off something metallic, binoculars or a rifle scope. Someone was watching them, just as they'd watched his father 50 years ago. The message was clear. Some secrets were worth killing for, and the people protecting those secrets were still very much alive. That evening, Cole sat at the small table in his father's old room, studying the journal by lamplight and planning his next move. The knowledge that Henderson, Walsh, and Associates might have received his father's evidence 30 days after the murder gave him hope, but 50 years was a long time. Law firms closed, partners retired or died, files got lost or destroyed. Still, it was a lead worth pursuing. Cole pulled out his cell phone. One of the few benefits of Gold Dust's location near the main highway was decent cellular reception, and began searching for the law firm his father had trusted with his evidence. To his surprise, Henderson, Walsh and Associates still existed, though it was now Henderson, Walsh and Crenshaw. Their website showed a respectable firm specializing in estate planning, mineral rights, and corporate law. Cole made note of their phone number and address, planning to contact them in the morning. Duke had been restless all evening, periodically moving to the window and watching the street below with vigilant attention. Cole trusted the dog's instincts. Duke had been his companion through enough dangerous situations on the ranch to recognize real threats. Around midnight, Cole's patience was rewarded. Duke's low growl alerted him to movement outside, and through the window he watched two figures approach the saloon. They moved with the careful precision of men accustomed to working in darkness, and Cole noticed both carried flashlights and what looked like tools. Cole extinguished his lamp and crept to the window for a better view. The men were systematically searching the exterior of the building, paying particular attention to the foundation and areas where someone might have hidden something. One of them was the tall, lean figure Cole recognized from his father's description. This had to be Carson, the nervous type mentioned in the journal. The other man was new to Cole, shorter and stockier, with the kind of build that suggested he was accustomed to physical labor. Both men moved with the confidence of people who knew they wouldn't be interrupted, as if they owned gold dust and everything in it. Cole watched as they pried at loose boards and examined every possible hiding place around the saloon's exterior. They were looking for something specific, probably more evidence that Thomas Burnham might have hidden before his death. The fact that they were still searching after 50 years suggested they'd never found everything his father had concealed. After 20 minutes, the men finished their search and moved away from the building, but they didn't leave. Instead, they positioned themselves across the street in the shadow of an old feed store, apparently settling in for a long surveillance session. Cole realized he was trapped. These men weren't just casual observers. They were serious about whatever they were protecting, and they were prepared to wait him out. Duke sensed the tension and pressed close to Cole's leg, offering silent comfort. As the hours passed, Cole used the time to study his father's notes more carefully. Thomas had been methodical in documenting not just what he observed, but when and where he observed it. The surveillance schedule he'd recorded showed the illegal mining operation followed a careful pattern, with activity concentrated on moonless nights when visibility was poorest. According to the journal, the mine itself had multiple access points. The main entrance, sealed with concrete and warning signs, was purely for show. The real work was being done through natural caves and old exploratory shafts that connected to the main vein from the back side of the mountain. One entry particularly caught Cole's attention. Found surveyor's stakes on the backside of the mountain about 2 miles from the main entrance. Someone's been mapping the underground layout systematically. This isn't random prospecting. It's a professional operation with serious backing. Thomas had included rough sketches of the area, marking locations where he'd seen activity and noting what appeared to be a main processing site in a natural depression hidden from the town's view. The detail in his father's work impressed Cole. Thomas Burnham might not have been a trained investigator, but he'd approached the situation with intelligence and thoroughness. Around 3 a.m, Cole spotted something that made his pulse quicken. In the back pages of the journal, folded carefully and inserted between the leaves, was a surveyor's map, official, detailed, and far more comprehensive than his father's rough sketches. The map showed the Copper Crown mine complex in professional detail, including underground tunnels, geological formations, and projected ore deposits. But most importantly, it revealed that the mine system extended much further than public records indicated. What the town believed was a small, played-out operation was actually an extensive network of underground passages connecting multiple ore bodies. Someone had marked the map with red ink, highlighting specific areas and making notations about ore quality and extraction potential. The dates on these annotations ranged from 1967 to 1968, confirming that the illegal operation had been well established when Thomas arrived in Gold Dust. At the bottom of the map, in the margin, someone had written, "Property of Morrison Geological Services, Denver, CEO," along with a phone number. Cole wondered if this was connected to Pete Morrison, the man who'd spoken with his father about the mine activity. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the two watchers across the street finally departed, apparently satisfied that Cole wasn't going anywhere immediately. Duke visibly relaxed as their footsteps faded into the distance, and Cole allowed himself to breathe normally for the first time in hours. But the night's surveillance had taught him something important. He was dealing with people who took their secrets seriously enough to maintain active security after 50 years. This wasn't a cold case or historical curiosity. It was an ongoing criminal enterprise worth protecting at any cost. Cole carefully photographed the surveyor's map with his phone, making sure to capture every detail and notation. Then he began planning his approach to the mine itself. If he was going to understand what his father had died for, he needed to see the operation firsthand. His father's notes mentioned a back route to the mining area that avoided the main access roads. Thomas had found it by following old animal trails and prospector paths that wound through the mountains behind gold dust. The route was longer and more difficult, but it offered the advantage of approaching the mine from an unexpected direction. As Cole packed his father's evidence carefully away, he reflected on how much his understanding had changed in just 2 days. He'd arrived in gold dust expecting to find closure about his father's abandonment. Instead, he discovered a murder, an ongoing criminal conspiracy, and evidence that suggested the scope of the illegal operation was far larger than Thomas had initially realized. Duke padded over to the window and looked out at the brightening street, his tail wagging slightly as if sensing that their vigil was ending. But Cole knew this was just the beginning. His father had started something in gold dust that had cost him his life. Now it was up to Cole to finish what Thomas Burnham had been unable to complete, exposing the truth and bringing justice to the men who'd stolen 50 years from his family. The morning sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the abandoned town. But somewhere in those mountains, Cole knew, the operation that had killed his father was still running, still profitable, and still worth killing to protect. The next morning, Cole decided to follow his father's route to the mine. Using the surveyor's map and Thomas's detailed notes, he plotted a path that would take him around the back side of the mountain, approaching the mining operation from an angle the current criminals wouldn't expect to be watched. Duke seemed to understand they were embarking on something important. The old German shepherd stayed close as they hiked through overgrown trails that hadn't seen regular use in decades. Cole carried a backpack with water, his father's evidence, and a pair of binoculars he'd found in the saloon storage room. The terrain was rougher than he'd anticipated. What had once been prospector trails were now barely visible paths, threading between boulders and stunted pine trees. Several times, Cole had to rely on his father's careful notes to find the correct route when the trail seemed to disappear entirely. After 2 hours of steady climbing, they reached a ridge that offered a clear view of the mine area. Cole settled behind a screen of rocks and studied the scene below through his binoculars, while Duke kept watch for anyone approaching their position. The contrast between the official story and reality was stark. While the main mine entrance was indeed sealed and posted with warning signs, the back side of the mountain buzzed with activity. A well-maintained dirt road led to a cluster of buildings that had definitely been constructed within the last few decades. Modern equipment was visible, including trucks, generators, and what appeared to be ore processing machinery. But most telling was the steady stream of vehicles coming and going. This wasn't occasional prospecting or small-scale treasure hunting. It was a full-scale mining operation with the infrastructure to support significant extraction and processing. Cole watched for over an hour, documenting what he observed and comparing it to his father's 50-year-old notes. The basic layout was the same, but the operation had clearly expanded substantially. Where Thomas had described a few men with basic equipment, Cole counted at least a dozen workers and enough machinery to suggest this was a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Around noon, a black SUV arrived at the mining compound, and Cole watched through his binoculars as a well-dressed man emerged. Even at this distance, There was something about the figure's bearing that suggested authority. This was probably the colonel that his father had mentioned, the shadowy leader of the operation. The man spent an hour touring the facility, clearly conducting some kind of inspection or progress review. Cole wished he could get closer, but the terrain offered no cover for a more detailed approach. Still, watching the operation confirmed what his father's evidence had suggested. This was a professional criminal enterprise with significant resources and careful organization. As Cole prepared to leave his observation post, Duke suddenly went rigid, his ears pricked forward and focused on something behind them. Cole turned slowly and felt his blood turn cold. A man was approaching through the trees, moving carefully but not trying to hide his presence. "Easy there, friend," the man called out when he saw he'd been spotted. "No need for anyone to get nervous." The newcomer was probably in his 60s, dressed in work clothes and carrying what looked like a geological survey kit. His approach was casual, but Cole noticed his hand never strayed far from a holstered sidearm. "Beautiful view from up here," the man continued as he drew closer. "Good place to watch birds or maybe other kinds of wildlife." Cole remained still, his hand resting gently on Duke's head to keep the dog calm. "Just doing some hiking," he replied carefully. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hiking? Sure. Name's Patterson, by the way. I do some survey work around these parts." He gestured toward the mining operation below. "Interesting place to hike, though. Most folks stick to the marked trails down by the highway. I like the quiet up here." "Oh, it's quiet, all right. So quiet that a man can think real clearly about important decisions." Patterson's tone remained conversational, but the implied threat was unmistakable. Like the decision about whether it's worth staying in an area where accidents can happen to folks who wander into places they shouldn't be. Cole felt Duke tense beside him, the dog sensing the threatening undertone in Patterson's voice. "I appreciate the concern, but I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can," Patterson replied, pulling a business card from his pocket. As he handed it over, Cole noticed the logo, Morrison Geological Services, Denver, CO. But sometimes even careful folks need to know when they're getting in over their heads. That's a friendly piece of advice. The business card was water-damaged and faded, but Cole recognized it immediately. This was the artifact he'd been hoping to find. The same card mentioned in his father's notes. But seeing it in Patterson's possession confirmed something ominous. This man had taken it from Thomas Burnham 50 years ago, probably after killing him. "Thanks for the advice," Cole said, pocketing the card while fighting to keep his voice steady. He was holding evidence of his father's murder, handed to him by one of the killers. Patterson studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read his thoughts. "You know, you remind me of someone I used to know. Fellow who came through Gold Dust years back, asking lots of questions about local history. Curious type, always poking around where he didn't belong." The implication hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Patterson was telling him, without quite saying it, that he remembered Thomas Burnham and what had happened to him. "What happened to that fellow?" Cole asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. Patterson's smile grew colder. "Oh, he moved on eventually, like most smart people do when they realize they're not welcome in a place." He glanced at his watch. "Well, I've got work to get back to. You folks have a safe hike down the mountain. And remember, marked trails are marked for good reasons." As Patterson disappeared back into the trees, Cole remained motionless for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The man had essentially confessed to being involved in his father's death while threatening Cole with the same fate. But he'd also made a mistake. He'd given Cole physical evidence that connected him to the crime. Duke whined softly, pressing against Cole's leg. The dog's instincts were telling him the same thing Cole's logic was screaming. They were in serious danger, and staying on the mountain any longer would be foolish. Cole carefully made his way down the mountain, following a different route than the one he'd used to climb up. His father's notes had mentioned several alternative paths, and Cole wanted to avoid another encounter with Patterson or his associates. As they descended, Cole's mind raced with the implications of what he'd learned. The mining operation was far larger and more sophisticated than his father had realized. The criminals had maintained their enterprise for over 50 years, suggesting they had protection, resources, and the will to eliminate threats. Most importantly, they were still actively protecting their secret, which meant they saw Cole as a genuine danger to their operation. But Cole also realized he now had something his father hadn't possessed: clear evidence of the ongoing criminal enterprise, photographic documentation of the illegal mining operation, and most importantly, the business card that could potentially be linked to his father's murder through DNA evidence or other forensic analysis. The question was whether Cole had the courage to use that evidence effectively and whether he could survive long enough to see justice done for his father's death. That evening, back in the safety of the saloon, Cole called Henderson, Walsh, and Crenshaw in Cheyenne. After being transferred through several secretaries, he finally reached Harold Crenshaw, one of the senior partners. "Mr. Burnham," Crenshaw said after Cole explained who he was. "That's a name I haven't heard in many years. Your father's package has been sitting in our vault since 1968. We've been wondering if anyone would ever claim it." Cole's heart raced. "The package still exists?" "Oh, yes. Your father was very specific in his instructions. The envelope was to be held indefinitely, released only to his son Cole upon proper identification, or to law enforcement with appropriate warrants. We've maintained it all these years as part of our fiduciary duty." "What's in it?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss that over the phone, Mr. Burnham, but I can tell you that your father included very detailed instructions about what should be done with the contents if certain circumstances arose. Perhaps you could come to Cheyenne." Cole arranged to drive to the law firm the next morning, his mind reeling with possibilities. His father had been even more thorough than Cole had imagined, creating multiple layers of protection for evidence that could expose his killers. Before leaving Gold Dust, Cole decided to make one more search of the saloon. Duke had been showing interest in a particular corner of the building's basement, and Cole trusted the dog's instincts enough to investigate thoroughly. The basement was cramped and musty, filled with debris from decades of neglect. But in the far corner, where Duke kept pawing at the stone foundation, Cole discovered something extraordinary. Hidden behind a loose stone was a metal box, larger than the tin container he'd found under the floorboards. Inside this box, wrapped in waterproof material, was evidence that would change everything Cole thought he knew about his father's investigation. The first item was a badge. Tarnished silver with an eagle design that Cole didn't immediately recognize. But the identification card attached to it made his blood run cold. "Thomas Burnham, Special Agent, Bureau of Land Management, Criminal Investigation Division." Cole stared at the badge and identification, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. His father hadn't been a drifter with a gambling problem and dreams of striking it rich. Thomas Burnham had been a federal law enforcement officer, working undercover to investigate the illegal mining operation in Gold Dust. The implications hit Cole like a physical blow. His father's abandonment of the family hadn't been abandonment at all. It had been a dangerous undercover assignment that had cost him his life. The gambling stories, the financial troubles, even the extended absence from home. All of it had been carefully constructed cover for a federal investigation. Additional documents in the box confirmed the scope of Thomas's real mission. He'd been part of a multi-agency task force investigating illegal mining operations on federal land throughout the Southwest. Gold Dust was just one target in a larger investigation that involved organized crime, corrupt local officials, and millions of dollars in stolen mineral resources. Cole found detailed reports that his father had filed with his superiors, documenting every aspect of the criminal enterprise. The reports revealed that the gold dust operation was connected to a larger network of illegal mining activities, with the stolen ore being processed and sold through legitimate channels by companies that existed solely to launder the proceeds. But the most shocking revelation was in Thomas's final report, dated September 14, 1968, the day before he disappeared. In it, he identified the true leader of the operation, the mysterious colonel mentioned in his personal journal. Subject operates under multiple identities but has been confirmed as Colonel Marcus Webb, former military intelligence officer, dishonorably discharged in 1963 for corruption. Webb has established a sophisticated network using former military contacts and corrupt civilian officials. Recommend immediate federal intervention with significant resources. The report included photographs that Thomas had somehow managed to take of Webb and other key figures in the operation. Even 50 years later, Cole could see the resemblance between the man in the photographs and the well-dressed figure he'd observed at the mining compound through his binoculars. But it was the final document in the box that made Cole's hands tremble with rage and understanding. A letter from Thomas to his family, never sent, explaining the truth about his assignment and his love for them. "My dearest Margaret and Cole," it began. "If you're reading this, then my cover has been blown and I won't be coming home. I need you to know that every day away from you has been agony, but the work I'm doing here is important. The men I'm investigating have stolen millions from the American people and corrupted everything they've touched. I can't let them continue." The letter explained that Thomas had volunteered for the undercover assignment because his background, a working man with financial troubles, made him perfect for infiltrating the operation. He'd agreed to the extended separation from his family because the case was too important to abandon. "I know you'll be angry with me for keeping this secret," Thomas had written, "but I couldn't risk your safety by telling you the truth. If something happens to me, please know that I died fighting for something that matters, and that I love you both more than life itself." Cole wiped tears from his eyes as he finished reading his father's final message. For 50 years, he'd carried the pain of abandonment, never knowing that his father had been a hero who died serving his country and protecting families like his own. Duke whined softly, sensing his master's emotional turmoil. Cole scratched behind the dog's ears, grateful for the loyal companionship that had helped him uncover the truth about Thomas Burnham's real identity and sacrifice. But even as Cole processed the emotional impact of these revelations, his mind was working on the practical implications. His father had been a federal agent killed in the line of duty, which meant his murder was a federal crime with no statute of limitations. The men who'd killed Thomas Burnham weren't just common criminals. They were cop killers who'd been evading justice for 5 decades. Moreover, the evidence Thomas had gathered as a federal agent would carry significant legal weight. Combined with Cole's own documentation of the ongoing illegal operation, there was enough evidence to bring down the entire criminal enterprise and ensure that everyone involved paid for their crimes. Cole carefully repacked all of his father's evidence, making sure to document everything with photographs and detailed notes. Tomorrow, he would drive to Cheyenne and collect whatever additional evidence Thomas had left with the law firm. Then he would take everything to the FBI and finally bring justice to the men who'd murdered Special Agent Thomas Burnham. As he climbed the stairs to his father's old room for what might be his last night in gold dust, Cole felt a profound sense of closure mixed with determination. He'd come here looking for answers about his father's abandonment, and found instead a legacy of courage, duty, and sacrifice. His father hadn't been a man who'd walked away from his responsibilities. He'd been a hero who died protecting them. Now it was Cole's turn to finish what Thomas Burnham had started and ensure that his father's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutters and sending tumbleweeds dancing down the empty street. But inside the saloon, Cole sat with his father's badge in his hands, finally understanding the man who'd given his life for justice and family honor. The boy who'd spent 50 years wondering why his father had abandoned him was gone, replaced by a man who understood the true meaning of duty, sacrifice, and love. Tomorrow, Cole would begin the process of bringing his father's killers to justice. Tonight, he would simply honor the memory of Special Agent Thomas Burnham and the courage that had defined his life and death. Cole left Gold Dust before dawn, Duke riding shotgun as they drove through the dark mountain passes toward Cheyenne. The revelation about his father's true identity had given him a new sense of purpose, but it had also made him acutely aware of the danger he faced. He was no longer just investigating a cold case. He was pursuing active federal fugitives who'd already killed one law enforcement officer. The drive to Cheyenne took 3 hours, giving Cole time to plan his approach. He'd contact the FBI after meeting with the law firm, but first he wanted to understand the full scope of evidence his father had accumulated. Thomas had been thorough in everything else. Cole suspected the package waiting in Cheyenne would contain the most damaging evidence of all. Henderson, Walsh, and Crenshaw occupied a stately brick building in downtown Cheyenne, the kind of establishment that radiated old money respectability and discretion. Harold Crenshaw met Cole personally, a distinguished man in his 70s who'd apparently been with the firm since before Thomas's package arrived. "Your father was quite specific about his instructions," Crenshaw explained as he led Cole to a secure conference room. The envelope was sealed when he delivered it, with explicit directions that it should only be opened by you or federal law enforcement officers, with appropriate authorization. Crenshaw placed a large manila envelope on the table, its edges yellowed with age, but the contents clearly preserved. Cole's name was written across the front in his father's careful handwriting, along with the date, September 15th, 1968. He also left this, Crenshaw added, producing a smaller envelope sealed with red wax. Instructions for what should be done if certain circumstances occurred. He was very concerned about protecting someone he called the package. Cole broke the wax seal on the smaller envelope and found a letter in his father's handwriting, dated the same day as the larger package. "Son," it began, "if you're reading this, then my cover has been blown and the operation has been compromised. The evidence in the main envelope will be enough to bring down the entire network, but only if it reaches the right people. I've included contact information for my handler at the Bureau of Land Management, Agent Patricia Walsh. If she's no longer available, contact the Denver FBI office and ask for the Organized Crime Task Force." The letter contained detailed instructions for how Cole should proceed, including specific protocols for ensuring his own safety while delivering the evidence to federal authorities. Thomas had even included emergency contact numbers and safe locations where Cole could meet with law enforcement if necessary. But it was the final paragraph that made Cole's heart race with anticipation and dread. "The most important evidence is in the hidden compartment of this envelope. Look for the false bottom. It contains something that will identify the real power behind this operation. Be careful, son. These people have connections that reach much higher than we initially realized." Cole examined the manila envelope more carefully and found what his father had described: a concealed compartment built into the bottom of the envelope. Inside was a small metal device that Cole didn't immediately recognize, along with a note explaining its significance. "Radio transmitter and recorder," Thomas had written, "contains recorded conversations between Webb and his political contacts. Names, dates, amounts of money, and specific details about corruption extending to the state capital. This is the evidence that will bring them all down." Cole stared at the device, realizing he was holding proof of a corruption network that had operated for decades with impunity. His father hadn't just been investigating a simple mining operation. He'd uncovered a web of corruption involving politicians, law enforcement, and business leaders throughout the region. Crenshaw watched with obvious curiosity as Cole examined his father's legacy. "Mr. Burnham, your father impressed me greatly during our brief meeting 50 years ago. He was clearly a man who understood the importance of ensuring justice survived, even if he didn't. Did he say anything else? Any other instructions? He mentioned that if you ever came to claim this evidence, I should give you one additional piece of advice. Crenshaw's expression grew serious. He said to remember that the men you'll be dealing with have survived this long by being ruthless and well-connected. Don't try to be a hero. Let the federal authorities handle the dangerous work. Cole thanked Crenshaw and carefully packed all of his father's evidence into a secure briefcase. As he prepared to leave, the elderly lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder. Your father was protecting something much larger than a mining operation, Mr. Burnham. Whatever you decide to do with that evidence, please be careful. Some secrets have a way of fighting back. The drive back to Gold Dust gave Cole time to process what he'd learned and plan his next steps. The recorded conversations on his father's device would need to be analyzed by federal experts, but even without hearing them, Cole understood their significance. Thomas had gathered evidence that could expose decades of corruption and bring down powerful people who thought themselves untouchable. But Cole also realized that delivering the evidence to federal authorities would take time, and time was something he might not have. Patterson and the others knew he was asking questions, and they'd already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their secret. Once they realized he'd found his father's evidence, Cole's life would be in immediate danger. As he drove through the mountain passes back toward Gold Dust, Cole noticed the same black SUV he'd seen at the mining compound staying consistently in his rearview mirror. They weren't trying to hide their surveillance. They wanted him to know he was being watched. Cole's cell phone rang as he navigated a particularly winding section of highway. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something made him answer. Mr. Burnham, a gravelly voice said. I believe we should have a conversation. Who is this? Someone who knew your father quite well. I understand you've been asking questions about old Tom Burnham and his time in Gold Dust. Cole felt his pulse quicken. The voice was older, more refined than Patterson's, but carried an unmistakable note of authority. What do you want to talk about? I want to offer you the same choice I offered your father 50 years ago. Walk away now with a generous compensation for your trouble, or continue down a path that can only end badly for everyone involved. And if I choose not to walk away? There was a pause, followed by a chuckle that chilled Cole's blood. Then you'll discover that some family traditions are better left unfinished. Your father was a stubborn man, Mr. Burnham. I hope you're wiser than he was. The line went dead, leaving Cole alone with the sound of his truck's engine and Duke's steady breathing. The black SUV was still behind him, close enough now that he could see two figures in the front seats. Cole's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he considered his options. He could drive straight to the FBI office in Denver, but that would mean abandoning any chance of gathering additional evidence from Gold Dust. More importantly, it would mean letting his father's killers escape justice once again while they destroyed evidence and disappeared. Alternatively, he could return to Gold Dust and attempt to gather more evidence using the recorded conversations and his father's detailed notes to build an airtight case. But that option would put him in direct confrontation with people who'd already proven their willingness to kill. As Cole approached the turnoff to Gold Dust, he made his decision. His father had died trying to expose these criminals, and Cole owed it to Thomas's memory to finish the job properly. But he wouldn't be stupid about it. He'd use every advantage his father's evidence provided, and every lesson Thomas's sacrifice had taught him. Duke sensed the change in Cole's mood and sat up alertly, his amber eyes focused on the road ahead. The old German shepherd had been with Cole through enough dangerous situations to recognize when his master was preparing for something serious. We're going to finish what Dad started, boy, Cole said quietly, reaching over to scratch behind Duke's ears. But we're going to be smarter about it than he was able to be. The turnoff to Gold Dust appeared ahead, and Cole could see the black SUV slowing as if deciding whether to follow him or continue toward Denver. In the end, they followed, confirming what Cole already suspected. The criminals were committed to stopping him regardless of which choice he made. As gold dust's abandoned buildings came into view, Cole felt a sense of coming full circle. He'd arrived here 3 days ago looking for answers about his father's abandonment. Now he was returning with the truth about Thomas Burnham's heroism and the evidence needed to bring his killers to justice. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ghost town, but Cole was no longer intimidated by gold dust's emptiness. Somewhere in these mountains was the illegal operation that had cost his father his life. Tonight, with Duke at his side and his father's courage as his guide, Cole would take the first steps toward ensuring that Special Agent Thomas Burnham's sacrifice had not been in vain. The black SUV parked across from the saloon as Cole pulled up to his temporary home, making no attempt to hide their presence. The message was clear. The conversation wasn't over, and the choices Cole made in the next few hours would determine whether he followed in his father's footsteps all the way to a premature grave. But Cole was no longer the same man who'd arrived in gold dust 3 days earlier. He was Thomas Burnham's son, and he'd inherited more than just his father's stubborn determination. He'd also inherited a federal agent's sense of duty and a murdered cop's claim to justice. Cole spent the early evening in the saloon, carefully examining the last piece of evidence he'd found in his father's hidden cache, a service pistol wrapped in oiled cloth. The weapon was a .38 Special, standard issue for federal agents in the 1960s, with Thomas Burnham's initials carefully engraved on the grip. This was the gun his father had carried as a federal law enforcement officer, the symbol of his oath to protect and serve. As Cole held the weapon, he felt a connection to his father that went beyond blood and family. Thomas Burnham had been a man who'd sworn to uphold justice, even when it cost him everything. Now Cole held that same responsibility, not just as a son seeking answers, but as the inheritor of an unfinished mission. Duke positioned himself by the front window, maintaining his vigilant watch on the black SUV parked across the street. The dog's behavior had grown increasingly alert throughout the afternoon, as if he sensed that the long stalking phase was coming to an end. Around 8 o'clock, Cole's patience was rewarded. 3 men emerged from the SUV and began approaching the saloon with purposeful strides. Cole recognized Patterson among them, along with Carson, the nervous man from his father's journal. The third figure was older, well-dressed despite the rural setting, and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. This had to be Webb, the colonel who'd been running the operation for over 50 years. Even at a distance, Cole could see the resemblance to the man in his father's old photograph. Webb had aged, but there was no mistaking the cold intelligence in his eyes or the way the other men deferred to his authority. Cole quickly secured his father's evidence in his backpack and checked the .38 Special. The weapon was loaded, and despite 5 decades in hiding, it appeared to be in excellent condition. Thomas had maintained his service weapon with the same care he'd shown for all his equipment. The 3 men didn't bother with subtlety as they approached the saloon. Webb walked directly to the front door and knocked, not the cautious tapping of someone unsure of their welcome, but the authoritative demand of a man expecting immediate compliance. "Mr. Burnham," Webb called out, his voice carrying the same authority Cole had heard on the phone. "I believe it's time for that conversation we discussed." Cole moved to the side of the front window, keeping Duke close beside him. "We can talk from here," he replied. "I'm comfortable with the current arrangements." Webb chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. "I'm sure you are. But I'm afraid I must insist on a more civilized discussion. You see, Mr. Burnham, you've stumbled into a situation that's much larger and more dangerous than you realize." "I realize enough," Cole answered. "I know you killed my father 50 years ago, and I know why." The silence that followed stretched for several seconds. When Webb spoke again, his tone had shifted from negotiation to something harder and more threatening. "Your father was a federal agent, Mr. Burnham. Did you know that? Special Agent Thomas Burnham of the Bureau of Land Management, working undercover to investigate what he believed was a simple mining operation. Webb paused, as if savoring the revelation. He had no idea what he'd really stumbled into. Cole felt his grip tighten on his father's pistol. Webb was confirming what Cole had already learned, but hearing it from his father's killer made the truth feel more real and more painful. Thomas was a good agent, Webb continued, thorough, dedicated, absolutely incorruptible. Those qualities made him very dangerous to people like me, but they also made him predictable. What do you mean? He contacted his superiors regularly, filing detailed reports about his investigation. What he didn't know was that one of those superiors was working for me. Every piece of evidence he gathered, every lead he followed, every plan he made, I knew about it all within hours. Cole felt the blood drain from his face. His father hadn't just been killed by the criminals he was investigating. He'd been betrayed by someone within his own agency, someone who'd sold him out to his enemies. Agent Patricia Walsh sends her regards, by the way, Webb added with malicious satisfaction. Retirement has been very comfortable for her, thanks to our generous pension plan. The revelation hit Cole like a physical blow. His father's handler, the woman Thomas had trusted with his life and his mission, had been corrupt. No wonder Webb's operation had survived for 50 years. They'd had protection from within the federal system itself. Duke's low growl brought Cole's attention back to the immediate situation. Through the window, he could see Patterson and Carson moving to flank the building while Webb kept him distracted with conversation. They were positioning themselves for an assault, just as they'd probably done with his father decades earlier. "You have something that belongs to me, Mr. Burnham," Webb called out. "Evidence that your father collected during his investigation. I'm prepared to be generous. Return what you found, walk away from Gold Dust, tonight, and you'll live to see your ranch again." Cole's mind raced through his options. He was outnumbered 3-1, trapped in a building with limited exits, and facing men who'd proven their willingness to kill. But he also had advantages his father hadn't possessed. He knew the truth about the corruption within the federal system. He had documented evidence of ongoing crimes, and most importantly, he was no longer alone in his investigation. Before leaving Cheyenne that afternoon, Cole had made one additional stop that he hadn't mentioned to anyone. He'd visited the FBI field office and spoken with Agent Sarah Chen, a federal prosecutor specializing in organized crime. Cole had provided her with copies of all his father's evidence and a detailed account of everything he'd discovered in Gold Dust. Agent Chen had been skeptical at first, but the quality and detail of Thomas Burnham's evidence had quickly convinced her that Cole's story was genuine. She'd promised that federal agents would be dispatched to Gold Dust within hours, but warned Cole to avoid direct confrontation with the criminals until backup arrived. Cole checked his watch. If Agent Chen had kept her word, federal reinforcements should be arriving soon. The question was whether Cole could survive long enough for help to reach him. Duke's hackles rose as footsteps approached the back of the building. Patterson and Carson were in position, waiting for Webb's signal to begin the final assault. Cole moved away from the front window, his father's pistol ready in his hand, and prepared to defend himself with the same courage that Special Agent Thomas Burnham had shown 50 years earlier. The assault began with the crash of splintering wood as Carson kicked in the saloon's back door. Cole had positioned himself behind the bar with Duke at his side, using the solid oak structure as cover while maintaining clear sight lines to both entrances. "Last chance, Burnham," Webb shouted from outside the front entrance. "Walk out now with your hands visible, and we can discuss reasonable terms." Cole's response was to cock the hammer on his father's .38 Special. The sound carried clearly in the silence, and he heard Webb curse under his breath. Negotiation time was over. Carson appeared first, moving cautiously through the back doorway with a modern semi-automatic pistol in his hands. The man's nervous energy, which Cole's father had noted 50 years ago, was still evident in his jerky movements and darting eyes. Duke erupted from behind the bar with a fury that surprised even Cole. The German shepherd had been bred for protection work. and his 8 years of loyalty to Cole had honed those instincts to a razor's edge. Carson's surprised shout turned to a scream of pain as Duke's powerful jaws clamped down on his gun arm. The distraction gave Cole the opening he needed. Rising from behind the bar, he put 2 rounds center mass into Carson's chest. The man who'd helped murder. His father collapsed beside the overturned tables where Thomas Burnham had probably spent his last conscious moments. Carson. Patterson's voice came from somewhere near the front of the building, followed by rapid footsteps as he moved to investigate the gunshots. Webb's patience finally snapped. "Kill him!" he roared. "Burn the whole place down if you have to, but make sure he doesn't leave here alive." Patterson burst through the front door with his weapon drawn, but Duke was already moving. The loyal dog launched himself at the intruder with the same protective instinct that had served Cole faithfully for 8 years. Patterson managed to get off one wild shot before Duke's weight bowled him over, sending them both crashing into a pile of broken furniture. Cole moved from behind the bar, his father's pistol trained on Patterson, but as he approached, something made him pause. In Patterson's jacket pocket, partially visible, was a small leather wallet that looked familiar. Cole reached for it while keeping his gun trained on the wounded man. Inside the wallet was a marriage certificate, yellowed with age but still legible. Thomas Burnham and Margaret Burnham, married June 15, 1959. This was the artifact Cole hadn't even known he was looking for, his parents' marriage license, taken from his father's body after the murder and kept as a trophy for 50 years. "You sick bastard," Cole whispered, understanding finally dawning. Patterson hadn't just killed his father. He'd kept souvenirs from the murder, mementos of the federal agent he'd helped destroy. Patterson coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Your old man fought like hell, but 3 against 1. Ain't fair odds." "It's about to be 1 against 1, Cole replied, glancing toward the front door where Webb's shadow was visible against the evening light. Duke limped back to Cole's side, favoring his left rear leg, but alert and ready to fight. The brave dog had taken a bullet from Patterson's wild shot, but his loyalty remained unshaken. Webb appeared in the doorway with military precision, his weapon sweeping the room as he assessed the situation. When he saw Carson's body and Patterson's condition, his face hardened with cold fury. "You're better than your father was," Webb admitted, stepping carefully over debris. "Thomas never managed to kill any of us. But you're still going to die here, just like he did." "Maybe," Cole replied, keeping his father's pistol trained on Webb while backing toward the stairs. "But this time, the evidence is already in federal hands. Agent Sarah Chen has everything my father collected, plus what I've found." Webb's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "Chen? That ambitious little prosecutor who thinks she can take down everyone who's been successful in this state. She doesn't have nearly enough to touch me." "She has the recorded conversations," Cole said, watching Webb's face carefully. "The ones my father captured with his surveillance equipment, your voice, discussing bribes, naming names, planning murders." Now Webb's composure cracked completely. "That's impossible. We destroyed all of Thomas's equipment after we killed him." "No," Cole said, feeling a grim satisfaction. "You destroyed the equipment you knew about. My father was smarter than that. He hid backup recordings where you'd never think to look." The sound of approaching vehicles made both men freeze. Through the broken windows, Cole could see the distinctive profile of federal law enforcement vehicles surrounding the saloon. Red and blue lights painted the walls in shifting patterns of color. "FBI, the building is surrounded." Agent Chen's voice carried clearly through a bullhorn. "Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands visible." Webb's eyes darted between Cole and the approaching agents, calculating odds and options. For 50 years, he'd been the predator, protected by corruption and willing accomplices. Now suddenly, he was trapped prey with nowhere to run. "You think this is over?" Webb snarled. "You think killing me will bring your daddy back? The operation will continue with or without me. Too many people depend on it. Too much money involved." Cole kept his father's gun steady, his finger on the trigger. Justice for Thomas Burnham was within reach, but something held him back. His father had been a federal agent sworn to uphold the law, even when it cost him everything. Thomas Burnham had chosen duty over vengeance, service over personal satisfaction. "You're right," Cole said finally. "Killing you won't bring him back, but watching you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison for murdering a federal agent, that'll do just fine." Webb's hand tightened on his weapon, and Cole saw the decision forming in the old criminal's eyes. Webb had spent 50 years believing he was untouchable, and facing justice was a humiliation he couldn't accept. The final confrontation was over in seconds, but those seconds contained a lifetime of justice finally served. 6 months later, Cole stood beside a freshly carved headstone in the federal cemetery outside Denver. The granite marker was simple but dignified. Thomas Burnham, Special Agent, Bureau of Land Management, 1932-1968. Killed in the line of duty. Beloved husband and father. Duke sat quietly beside him, the old German shepherd's leg fully healed from the bullet wound he'd suffered in the saloon. The dog seemed to understand the solemnity of the moment, his amber eyes fixed on the headstone as if paying his own respects to the father he'd never met. The funeral had been attended by hundreds of people, federal agents, law enforcement officers, politicians, and ordinary citizens who'd learned about Thomas Burnham's sacrifice through the extensive media coverage that followed Webb's arrest. Cole's father had finally received the recognition he deserved 50 years after giving his life for justice. Agent Sarah Chen approached across the cemetery grounds, her professional demeanor softened by genuine respect for the man they were honoring. In the months since the confrontation in Gold Dust, she'd become not just the federal prosecutor handling the case, but a friend who understood the weight of what Cole had endured. "The sentencing hearing is scheduled for next week," she said quietly, joining Cole beside the grave. Webb's plea bargain was approved. Life in prison without possibility of parole, plus restitution of over $40 million to the federal government. Cole nodded, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Webb had ultimately chosen to cooperate rather than face trial for the murder of a federal agent, providing detailed information about the corruption network that had protected his operation for decades. The plea bargain had ensured that justice would be swift and certain, even if it meant Webb would avoid the death penalty. "What about Agent Walsh?" Cole asked. "She'll die in federal prison," Chen replied with grim satisfaction. "Conspiracy to commit murder of a federal officer, along with 5 decades of corruption charges. The judge made it clear that betraying a fellow agent was an unforgivable violation of everything law enforcement represents." Patricia Walsh's arrest had been one of the most shocking developments in the case. The woman who'd been Thomas Burnham's handler and confidant had not only sold him out to his killers, but had spent 50 years helping to cover up the crime. Her corruption had extended far beyond the Gold Dust operation, touching dozens of cases and compromising countless investigations. Cole reached into his jacket and pulled out the final artifact from his father's hidden evidence. A new deed, freshly signed and notarized. "I've decided what to do with the saloon and the mine," he said, handing the document to Agent Chen. She read it carefully, her eyebrows rising as she understood the implications. "You're deeding everything to the town of Gold Dust?" "The mining operation generated over $40 million in stolen revenue," Cole explained. "That money rightfully belongs to the American people, but I wanted Gold Dust to benefit from something positive coming out of all this tragedy. The deed establishes a foundation that will use the mine's legitimate mineral rights to fund community development and a memorial to my father." Agent Chen smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Cole had seen from her since their professional relationship began. "Your father would be proud of that decision. It turns something that caused so much pain into something that can help people." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching as other visitors moved among the graves, paying their respects to the men and women who'd given their lives in service to their country. Cole felt a sense of peace that had been absent from his life for as long as he could remember. "There's one more thing," Agent Chen said, pulling an envelope from her briefcase. "This came from the Bureau of Land Management. It's been 50 years overdue." Inside the envelope was a medal, the Public Safety Officer Medal of Valor, awarded posthumously to Special Agent Thomas Burnham for extraordinary courage in the face of mortal danger. The citation detailed his undercover work, his meticulous investigation, and his ultimate sacrifice in the service of justice. Cole held the medal carefully, feeling its weight in his hands. This was what his father had earned through his courage and dedication. Recognition that his life and death had meaning beyond the personal tragedy his family had endured. Duke nuzzled against Cole's leg, drawing his attention back to the present moment. The old dog had been Cole's constant companion throughout the investigation, sharing the danger and providing the loyalty that had made survival possible. Now Duke seemed ready to move forward, to continue the life they'd built together on the ranch. "We should head home, boy," Cole said, scratching behind Duke's ears. "The horses are waiting, and we've got a ranch to run." As they walked toward Cole's truck, Agent Chen fell into step beside them. "Will you stay in touch?" she asked. "The federal task force could use consultants who understand how these corruption networks operate." Cole considered the offer for a moment. The idea of continuing his father's work, of helping to expose other criminals who thought themselves untouchable, had a certain appeal. But he'd found what he came looking for in gold dust. Not just answers about his father's disappearance, but understanding of the man Thomas Burnham had been. "I'll think about it," Cole replied honestly. "But right now, I need to get back to being a horse breeder. It's what my father would have wanted. For me to live my own life, not spend it trying to finish his battles." The drive back to Wyoming took Cole through the mountains past Gold Dust one final time. The town looked different now. Federal agents had dismantled the illegal mining operation, and legitimate development was beginning to breathe new life into the abandoned community. The saloon still stood, but now it bore a bronze plaque identifying it as the Thomas Burnham Memorial, honoring the federal agent who died fighting corruption in these mountains. Cole pulled over for a moment, letting Duke explore the area around the memorial, while he reflected on everything that had changed since his first arrival in Gold Dust 6 months earlier. He'd come here as a bitter man haunted by abandonment, carrying 50 years of pain and unanswered questions. He was leaving as someone who understood the true meaning of courage, sacrifice, and family honor. Duke returned to the truck with his tail wagging, ready to continue their journey home. As Cole drove away from Gold Dust for the final time, he felt his father's presence not as a burden of unfinished business, but as a legacy of strength and integrity that would guide him for the rest of his life. The ghost town disappeared behind the mountains, but the memory of Special Agent Thomas Burnham lived on. In the medal Cole would display with honor, in the memorial that would remind future generations of his sacrifice, and in the son who finally understood that some fathers never really leave. They just wait patiently for their children to find them.